All right, let's give this a second to warm up. Perhaps buffer a little bit, and I'll cut this out here in post. Hey Guildies, Fletch here. Today I'm going to talk about Agile principle number 2, in no particular order other than the first one, but just so happens to be that principle 2 I think is in a great position. Principle 2 is what I call the Agile principle, the aptly named Agile principle. And pretty much what this is the principle that essentially says we need to be agile, something like that. The whole thing is agile, obviously. It's just this is the one that I think is like step one, make sure we satisfy the customer because we better get that out of the way and make sure that the business is very clear that we're engineers, but we're always keeping them in mind. I was like, better put that up there at the top. But then number 2 is like, all right, let's be agile, and then let's even get into some more stuff down here. Okay, so number 2, the agile principle. Let's see something else over here. All right, so the agile principle, welcome changing requirements. The history of why these principles come up, I talk about some of the history a lot. I'm no expert on the history, just from things that I've read and researched myself. Welcome changing requirements. I wasn't developing professionally for large corporations or anything like that in the 90s. I did some personal stuff and I did some small stuff for that was pushed to production per se, contributed to some repos, um, contributed to some projects. There weren't any repos, but I contributed to some projects. So welcome changing requirements. This was because these people, these 17 people, as well as most of the real software engineers of those times, which I was not, they were having to say these are the requirements, and we're not going to change these until we get something released. We'll release something. This is sort of the same way Agile works right now, but we're going to release something, and then we'll talk about scope creep and requirements and things like that, so requirement changes. But the thing is, they didn't push more than every multiple months, maybe every 6 months, maybe yearly, maybe once a year they pushed. And depending on what company you worked for, even back then, 2001, you may be pushing most companies, in the big scheme of things, a lot of companies may have been pushing every couple of months, which is not as bad as yearly, obviously. And some of the fastest companies, the ones that their experience with the best companies were the ones that were pushing every couple of weeks. But by and large, the companies were pushing every very large number of months, if not yearly. Just so we're clear, the Agile Manifesto, these principles are just some of the principles that they came to the table with when they were bringing this together. They didn't want to write every possible principle or idea that they had out there. And they didn't invent these either. These are principles that they each brought from their experience that they had seen work well in companies over their whole experience. So over the 20 years plus of experience that they had each. So they weren't making these principles up, but welcome changing requirements is something that they saw work for companies, or even in the one company, the best teams were the ones that were welcoming changing requirements. And what that means is it's not just wait until we push something at the once a year. I think it may still be wait until we push something, but it's more like let's push things out, let's continuously deliver and get feedback and welcome a change. So not just, okay, we're going to get feedback, we'll put that on the backlog, we'll put that at the end for when we do the real push of the whole finished product. But these bits of feature, if not completed small features, if you break them down small, those were pieces that we wanted to get feedback on and course correct. Because if you're, like I did the compass example last time, if you are heading the wrong direction and you're getting feedback saying you're going the wrong direction, but you don't listen to it, then there's no point in getting feedback. And there's no point in having welcoming change requirements. So in order to be agile and actually make those course corrections, you want to welcome changing requirements, even late in development. So, it's easy to say this. Oh yeah, we started developing, and oh yeah, you wanted to tweak a little thing. Okay, cool. That's perfectly fine. Like almost any project, you want to tweak something. Oh man, we almost started really getting into development. Let's change that year-long plan that you had. Okay, but even late in development. So this isn't just also that late in development you've been programming. Let's say you're following an agile principled methodology or set of processes or whatever your company has come up with, and you've been working on this project for, let's say, 4 months. And once a week, you guys get feedback, come in, you like schedule a thing. We're going to review all the feedback that the product owner has put together. They've sorted it and everything. We're going to review that feedback once a week, and we're going to, course correct a little bit. But let's say you get all the way down, you've course corrected, you've gotten all the way here, and it's late in development, and they say, this is the thing that we want to change down here. Now, if they say change the whole project, scrap the whole thing, then we're not talking about the same thing. But if they're saying the course correction we need to make, turns out now that we've gotten this far, we need to, even late in development, say we need to change a requirement. Now, this will happen all the time for governmental reasons or compliance reasons. You'll be finishing a project, and then the IRS or something will come out and say, hey, we're changing the tax law. And oh my gosh, we need to change something down here. Back in the day, they'd say, well, we're going to get this out because the IRS is going to give some leeway time for a year, or they're going to put it into effect, but it's not going to be required till next year. And so we'll just do another project later on, or we'll put these changes later on. But we're saying, let's be agile. Let's put this in right now. Let's course correct it all the way over, even though that's a very deep thing. Let's course correct. So agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. If you're the company that says, yes, but we are agile, we will be able to course correct that and get this IRS law out right now, and you happen to be a company that does something in finance or payroll or something, then your company is going to be the product that people want to use. They're going to say, I know it's not required until next year, but we want to take advantage of it if it's like a good IRS change, a good tax change. We want to take advantage of it this year. We don't want to, let's get out the current project and then by next year we'll finish up the next. Yeah. So welcome changing requirements, even late in development. For this one, I'm going to do a little bit of pushback. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. So this may be called the Agile principle by me, but it also may be called the scope creep principle, because you can imagine that if you welcome changing requirements, how is the business going to manage that? So I've got a little list of devil's advocate things over here. Constant changes can lead to uncontrolled scope expansion, making projects harder to manage and increasing the risk of delays. So is this really a concern? Well, if you're doing a project and you have work on this, work on this, work on this, and you're scheduling those things of we're fully working out and documenting this story as a project. I keep using the word project for a reason, but this is a story. This is a story. This is a story. Work on these things. Then the way that your mindset is when we have a changing requirement, we're going to have to take that story off the board, possibly move it down, and change the requirements of it. So change the acceptance criteria or something of that story and reschedule it for another time. So while we're working on that and changing the requirements, maybe we can put the dev on something else. But if you are in a company that's being agile, you shouldn't necessarily be doing a project. I know I've been saying the word project a lot because I've mostly been talking about the way things were, but you shouldn't be doing a project. You should say, we have a lot of information. We have communicated with the developers, and I'm not going to prescribe how exactly this happens, but we communicate with the developers. We have some way of communicating to them, these are the things that we want. And the developers speak with each other and they say, we're going to tackle this in this method. We're going to be doing this sort of thing. And it can even be prioritized. It can the work can be prioritized. Let's imagine working out of backlog, for example, to go into terms of things that most of the people watching this probably know. There's a backlog. The developers are going to work on the next highest thing that they can work on. And if there's, let's say, two or three things at the top that they can't work on, and really the developers are constantly talking and saying, we don't really have someone to work on that, then that's something they communicate to the organization, and the organization will give them the environment and tools that they need and trust them to work on it, or possibly bring on some additional talent or something like that. They shouldn't be moving developers on and off and things and controlling the developer's schedule, but they should be able to say, there's working out of backlog. There's no project per se. There's just, we have a product that we're trying to get out, and here's the acceptance criteria. Here's all the things that we want, and how you sort it and organize it is up to you. But if there's a change, then we make the change, and then the developers continue to work on it. There's never a break. There's never a, well, let's completely shift our mentality and change this sprint, and we got to wait till the next sprint. We're going to move things around, and there shouldn't be any of that. It should be, we're changing the requirements. The developers are in the loop on this, and they say, okay, we're going to change the requirements. It's not really scope creep. It's just the things are changing while we're doing it. Resource and budget management. Frequent changes can strain resources and exceed budgets as teams continually adjust plans and allocations. And there's a few different ones that are like this. So if you're constantly making changes, when are you going to finish this project, for lack of a better word right now? That's a good question. When are we going to finish this thing if we're constantly allowing this, not scope creep, just changes to the requirements, and it's not scope creep? When are we going to finish it if we're constantly allowing that? Well, the question really might be, if you're going like this, when will you finish it? If your goal is here and you're doing this, when are you going to finish it? Now, in reality, your goal, who knows where it is? Let's say it's over here and you're going like this, right? You're going toward that goal from the beginning. But in real life, that goal is changing, because as the customers see the development, and as time is going on, they see what the customer feedback is, and like, no, we don't want that, but let's add this. They're doing that. That goal is changing, whether you like it or not, whether you call it scope creep or not, and whether or not you put it into the backlog. That goal is going to change, no matter who you are, what company you work for. So if you say from the beginning, it seems pretty clear we've got this goal, let's start down this path, that goal is going to be changing. And so you do want to be course correcting to follow that goal no matter what. So there's really no such thing as scope creep. There's course correction. And anything that says, anytime you say, what about budget management? We need to change the budget. When would we finish it? If the goal is changing this way and you're going like this, you will never finish it. In that case, let's just stay on the course, and let's not change course, and let's not get feedback, and let's worry about scope creep. In that case, you will literally never reach the goal. You will reach some goal, and then the customers will be disappointed, and they'll go to the company that did implement the new iOS changes. So yay, we reached the goal. But in that case, you haven't really achieved success. You haven't delivered the valuable software. You just delivered something that was decided upon a couple months ago. So welcome changing requirements, even late in development. What else is there in here? Impact on team morale and productivity. And this has to do with developers, the QA, some other things, maybe stakeholders or not stakeholders, product owner or something like that. So my morale as a developer, if I'm programming something and then someone comes along and says, that's not how we want it. We want to change, let's say you're doing the web development. We want to change the design. We want to move things around. Or we want to change the hero banner, the hero image. Or we want to change, let's not do a sidebar, let's do top menu, or something like that. If I'm a developer, I'm doing things and they change it, that's what I'll do. But then I'll go to work. And if my morale is hurt, I'm not trying to be mean to other developers like myself, but if my morale is hurt, then I'm getting too attached to the code and forgetting that my job is to satisfy the customer. So if my job is to satisfy the customer and I'm making changes, and then they're like, we need to do a course correction, and I need to change that, and they're saying we need course correction, and it changes back. No matter what the course correction is, as a developer, my job is to do this work and satisfy the customer. And they can go back and forth for multiple different reasons. Maybe in one sense, the main stakeholders who are actively participating in the demos, they don't like it, so you change it, course correct this way, change something on the development, change something the way it works. But then as the product is released more and more into the public, then you get a public outcry essentially of a lot of people. Turns out that your little stakeholder, like small demo group, is does not quite represent the actual big group of stakeholders, and they say no, well, this isn't good, and so you're like, oh, let's course correct back this way, and that's fine, course correct, change things like that. So if your team morale is hurting because there's a lot of course corrections happening, then the goal is just to ensure them. The goal is for leadership and management to talk to them and make sure that they understand that what they're doing is valuable, what they're doing is satisfying the customer, and the problem isn't with them. A lot of times developers will feel like, oh, I gotta make a change, I gotta make a change. Am I doing something wrong? And I've actually heard this literally from developers multiple times whenever there's course correction changes. What am I doing wrong, and how can I improve so that this doesn't happen again? And you just need to explain to them the ability to be agile, agility, and the ability to change these things is not a problem with them, it's a success with them. So the ability to do that means that they're doing a good job, and that is something to celebrate. It's tough to get that across just sort of naturally. You have to literally tell them these sort of things if there are morale problems. And if you don't know if there's morale problems or not, then you need to be more active in retrospection. I don't want to say retrospective as if this is a term that's owned by Scrum that you do at once every 2 weeks or something like that. But retrospection, where the group comes together and they talk about what they can improve and how they're feeling and what problems they're having and stuff like that. In these meetings that happen, the leadership, so like the chief software engineer or the principal software engineer or the leadership is in those meetings, and they need to be there in order to describe these things. What else do we got here? Client and stakeholder misunderstandings. Client is expecting a fixed scope and timeline. Okay, so in this case, if we're saying the client, the stakeholders, like the client, if we're developing an application directly for, let's say, company B, so we're not developing a web application where there's thousands or millions of users or something like that, and we're trying to get feedback from them. We're developing it directly for company B, then this shouldn't be an issue because the feedback that we're supposed to be getting is supposed to be from the stakeholder. So if company B, if this is a concern someone tries to bring up and they're saying that company B is frustrated that there's constantly scope changes or constantly course corrections, the only reason we're course correcting is if company B says we need to course correct, because they're the stakeholder. They're the ones giving the feedback at that point, and they're saying, oh, we don't like this, let's change it to this. If it wasn't important, and we can even explain this to them, if they start to say, all these course corrections are bad, we can explain to them, we will course correct as much or as little as you require, that as long as we're delivering to you the valuable software you need and satisfying your needs, that we're only course correcting based on what you need. So if you have things that are sort of less important, it's sort of like, hey, maybe we can think about this, then we'll put it on the let's think about this list. Versus if they say we need to course correct because there was a change in IRS or a change with one of their third-party vendors that they need to work with, or a change in the way that their customers work. So if there's something important, then that's up to them to say to course correct. Difficulty in long-term planning. How are you going to make long-term project planning if you have a complexity of course correcting, if you have a complexity of welcoming changing requirements? Where did my mouse go? There it is. Well, the problem's in the question. You shouldn't be doing long-term project planning, probably let alone project planning at all. You have a product, you have information on what has to happen on that product, and I'm not going to specify exactly how you deal with that. Some of it is commonplace, and some of it is misused or not implemented correctly. But it can be whatever you need to do. So you have a product, you have information on what has to happen, possibly prioritized by the product owner. You have constant communication with the developers, and they're just working on the things that they need to work on, and the company needs to trust them to get the job done. Uh, if you're planning a long-term project and you're planning for this point here, I wonder if I'm even visible when I'm pointing that high up. I don't know. Yeah, you're planning for this point way up here, and this is a lot of planning that you're doing, but you're only developing right here. You need to be planning here. I mean, maybe there's a vision statement for stuff up here, but you don't do project planning for stuff up here. You do planning down here, you do communication, collaboration, feedback cycles, and development down here. And this is just the vision. If there's changes that require course correction, you have your leader, essentially your product owner or someone who's talking with the stakeholders, someone who represents the customers, if not directly the customers. You have them just above where the development is, leading them like this. Really, the development starting here doesn't need to know this right here. I mean, they should know the vision, but if there happens to be specific things and specific goals and uh, whatever, some other priorities that the business has that happens to be up here, it's okay for them to hear some of those things, but they don't need to be planning for that quite yet. Now, your software architect or your chief engineer, or like maybe someone in the higher up leadership of your development team may be more privy to that information. But for your development team that's working on each feature of this product, doesn't need to be bogged down by knowing everything about the product. So let's go back to what I was talking about even. Long-term planning. So long-term planning isn't a thing that should be happening, so that shouldn't be a concern. So that's pretty much this plus the pushback for this. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. That is the Agile principle, or if you want to be give criticism, you might call it the scope creep principle. But given the information I just showed you, scope creep shouldn't be a concern. The fact that it doesn't work well with long-term planning shouldn't be a concern. And the fact that morale may be affected shouldn't be a concern. As long as you're communicating that the developers are doing good, that they're staying on course, and you're communicating to the customers, you tell us what you want us to course correct. Don't just, if you go to a demo meeting, customers just say things sometimes. A lot of times they just talk and talk. And I say demo meetings, but any sort of feedback forms that you have for them, or if the UX team is doing UX research and talking to them or talking to customers, stuff like that. A lot of people just say things, but the professional people professional UX researchers, let's say, who are gathering all of the information and the feedback, they know how to apply that to also what is the general consensus and what is their feel for things. Not just, one of our customers said, make the whole website red, so we can make the red. You need to listen to the customers, and you need to communicate with them and make sure that it's something that they want or something that they need, something that they're just curious about, that you need to communicate with them about. If you're having these frequent feedback sessions, having good communication, good collaboration, then you can define what a requirement is, a changed requirement versus some other negative implication of that. And you can welcome changing requirements, even late in development. And so that is principle number 2. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. And I can't wait to do principle number 3, 4, and 5, especially number 5. So check back with me, and I hope you guys have a great day.